Díomh gach daoine agus fáilte go dtí a cad of brethbh is Misha Cuivine ó Flanagan. Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to the Brehon Academy. I'm Kevin Flanagan. And tonight we're going to be going on a journey into the mind and consciousness, but also into early Irish culture and mythology. We're going to be talking about Imbas Forasnai. Now, if you don't know what Imbas Forosnai is, it comes from Cormac's glossary and it's loosely translated as illumination or insight, inspiration. And it's associated with the Filidh poets of early Ireland and also the Druids. Now, I don't want to ruin what we're about to talk about, so I don't want to go into too much information now. But before we get into the interview, just again to remind you to please check out the brehonacademy.org. You can get information about our online courses over there. You can also access the gift shop, the merchandise store, and you can pick up yourself a few t-shirts, posters, mugs, etc. We are on social media, on Facebook, on X, on Instagram, and of course we're on YouTube. So if you're not subscribed to this channel, please hit subscribe now. And if you're really interested in learning more about this content and getting access to exclusives, including competitions, behind the scenes, then please consider becoming a member of the Brehon Academy YouTube channel today. We have 6 memberships and you can get access for as little as $1.99 per month. Now, with all of that being said, let's jump into the interview where I'm going to be speaking with Rob Ó Cobhthaigh. Hello, Robert Coffey. You're very welcome to the Brehon Academy. How I found out about your work was I noticed that you had been putting videos up on Instagram and I think TikTok as well. And what I first noticed about them is that they're very similar to the sort of videos that I was putting out. Specifically, I'm talking about Irish mythology, the early Irish history, the old Irish customs, and so on. And I reached out to you about a month ago to see if you would be interested in doing an interview with me, and I'm glad that you agreed to do that. So thank you for that. But what I what I since learned about you is that you have a business or you offer services. InwardBound.ie, I think is the website. And this is where you're combining retreats with psychedelics. And when I asked you what do you want to talk about, I was very surprised that you said something like um, Imbas Forasnai, evidence for an indigenous Gaelic shamanic tradition of which psilocybin mushrooms and Amanita muscaria are part of. I don't think that that's a bit of a mouthful, so I don't think it will end up being called that. But anyway, I was quite surprised that this is what you wanted to talk about because I assumed that you would be, more interested in talking about mythology and things like that. So thanks for joining me on this call, Robert. And I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about your background, talk about your journey to Inward Bound, and what inspired you to start offering these services, and why do you make Irish mythology videos on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok? So that's over to you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Listen, I've been following your work for years, and I feel like we are sharing a similar passion, shall we say. I've always, since I was a kid, I always had a deep interest in Irish mythology, history, almost an obsession, I would say. When I was, a young kid, I read everything, and reading all the ancient myths, the Cuchulainn cycle, about the Fianna. I grew up in Rathfarnham or Knockline in the south suburbs of Dublin there. But even that land is full of history. Like Glenasmole up the road from me, the Valley of the Thrush, like the Fianna were supposed to, that was one of the hunting grounds of the Fianna. And that's just like literally, I used to go up there on my bike when I was a teenager, up the back of Brina there. So it's always been in my blood. It's always been in my, like this deep fascination with the ancient ways. And Thanks for the long introduction. I do work with psilocybin psychedelics as a therapist in the Netherlands, but honestly, my deep passion is yeah, remembering our ancient ways, I suppose. And I feel like a lot of us are feeling that call at the moment. That's why we're all kind of remembering, and I feel like I'm part of that. I'm trying to remember our ancient ways and trying to yeah bring them to the present, not to go back in time, that's not possible, but how can we integrate those, the ancient wisdom that we have in our blood? How can we integrate that into our present lives and going forward as well?
Yeah, you made me smile there because you caused me to think of my own childhood. You probably remember when I think it was third class junior infants and in junior school, should I say, when we start learning history for the first time. And I remember that we were learning about the legends. And my brother and my cousin, there was no younger cousins born yet because they all came later, right? So I'm the eldest on both sides of the family, and then I have a younger brother who's about a little less than 2 years younger than me, and the cousin is the same age as him. And I remember coming home from school, and we would sit down in River Valley, Glen and I would just be telling them the stories that I had learned in school. And so I was very disappointed the next year when we started to do real history, about 1916 and Eamon de Valera and all of that sort of stuff, because I always assumed that history was going to be about the mythology, the mythological history. So that's why I smiled when you said that.
And it's true. Remember in primary school, I remember going to Newgrange, Brunabonia as on a school tour and just being blown away by it and feeling something, and I think then was it maybe around 12 or when we go into secondary school, we don't study Irish history anymore, or not ancient or medieval history. We only study, 19th, 20th century. And I feel like there's a great loss there that we've
Yeah,
forgotten our Gaelic past.
yeah.
And it's almost intentional. I don't know, is it intentional, but it's
I starting to, well, not that I'm starting to think, I kind of came to that conclusion many years ago. It's like if they wanted us to know this, they would talk about it more. And I had to basically go off and educate myself in the mythologies. And if I could show you my bookshelf over there, it's full of books on mythologies, folk tales, but also Brehon Law and also early, Irish medieval history. Um, so yeah, I think it's intentional that they're kind of this trying to divorce Irish people from who they really are. And
yes.
yeah, I don't know if you caught that. I shared the Conor McDarry recording on the channel a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months ago. And he's an interesting character because he's kind of he's bringing up sort of topics that would, if they're true, would lead you to assume that this was not just Irish people, but it was kind of a concerted effort globally to suppress the Gaelic church, Gaelic wisdom, and Gaelic kingship. But I feel like we could go down this path for a long time, but that's not why we're here to talk. That's not what we're here to talk about. So, what inspired you to start guiding people through mushroom assisted experiences? Can you just talk me through that step-by-step process that you were like, okay, this is what I want to do with my life now?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it all began as a teenager. I grew up in the outskirts of Dublin. And when I was 16, I think I had my first psychedelic experience with the Liberty Cap. We walked up to Tala, up towards Bourne, up to Glenasmole, actually, up that way, and picked mushrooms. And we knew nothing. Like, it was before the internet, so we didn't know anything about dosages. And we ended up, myself and a few friends, taking what now I realize was a really, really high dose of what I believe now to be the indigenous medicine of Ireland. And I had a really profound spiritual experience that night. It was around Halloween, we were teenagers hanging out in the housing estates of Dublin. And I ended up having this hugely powerful psychedelic experience with one of my best friends at the time, Colin Quinn, who didn't have a good experience. I did have this incredible experience connecting with like the universe, nature in a way that I'd never experienced before. And I literally woke up the next day with this feeling of I'm never going to be the same again. Something changed. for the positive for me. Now, my best friend Colin had a challenging experience that night, so I've always been aware of the potential benefits and also the potential challenges of psychedelics. So yeah, and then basically I took psilocybin a few more times, but it wasn't mushrooms weren't part of my life for a very long time. From my 20s, it was only in my 30s I had some crises, healing crises, you could say, heartbreak and tragedies that occurred in my life that basically made me realize that I needed to change and to start looking at myself a bit more. So I started doing more yoga, meditation, becoming interested in the inner work. Eventually started training as a psychotherapist. This is over like a decade kind of period. Then and then I was in Hawaii, and I was introduced to ayahuasca. And I had this incredible experience on the side of the volcano in Maui with ayahuasca, like life changing. But the kind of message I got among others was that, I need to reconnect to the medicine of Ireland. And after that, I was like, wow, Ireland is a very powerful place. Even in Maui, in Hawaii, when I was there, that the local people knew about Ireland and they knew about the power of Ireland. Like there's this, even all across the globe, people know that Ireland is a very special place, spiritually, energetically. And I suppose through with ayahuasca and the mushrooms, I started really understanding that again, you know maybe it's something I had as a kid, but you get caught up in life and conforming and going to school and going to college. But then I had this, I suppose you could call it an awakening. And then I really began to connecting to the sacred sites in the land of Ireland. Um, and yeah, to answer your question, um, I started experiencing mushrooms and seeing how powerful, of course, that can be again after a long break, eventually holding space for others, friends and things like that. And over a long period of time, eventually began working with Inward Bound in the Netherlands, where psilocybin therapy is legal. It was never planned. Like if it was the opposite of planned. It was kind of my own lived experience. It was the path that I walked, and then I began helping, I suppose, supporting other people on that journey.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that information. I was smiling as you were talking there because you reminded me of um, also I've had psychedelic experiences, and there was one in particular where I would say my life changed for the better as well. I was working in for a bank at the time in a call center for a bank, so I wasn't like a teller on the desk or anything. And yeah, I had this transformational experience which set me on a path that I probably wouldn't have walked if I didn't have that transformational experience. So I'm absolutely aware of the transformative power of psychedelics. So can you describe the type of people who come and seek out your services? What are their common goals? What are their common complaints?
So we work with people from all over the world, I think 40 countries now, um, in Holland and in Costa Rica. And people come for healing, they come for growth. So we're strict. We don't work with really sick people. So we don't work with really sick people mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and that's hard for them, but it's to protect us really as well, because what we've learned over the years is that this type of therapy is not for everyone. We don't say it's for everyone. I feel it works best for people who've done a lot of therapy, inner work, and are looking for that extra, the incredibly powerful experiences you can have on mushrooms to connect with your psyche, your soul, your spirit, whatever you want to say. Um, And we work with what my teacher Martin Duffy calls the walking wounded, so the average human being. We've also worked with a lot of trauma, like sexual trauma, child sexual abuse. We've worked with survivors. We've worked with a lot of PTSD, U.S. Navy SEALs, special forces who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan with, severe PTSD. Survivors of terrorism in Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s. We've worked with survivors of genocide, Cambodia. So it can be heavy. We do work very therapeutically. That work can be heavy, but it also can be super light, people connecting to their joy and their playfulness and their creativity, so it's both. It can be both of those things. Um, yeah, and I've 7 years now we're doing it. over 1,000 people have come to our retreats, and I've tremendous respect. For me, it's soul work. It's there was a reason there were mystery schools in ancient Egypt and Eleusis and places like that. I feel like that it is that type of work. It has that power, and I have that respect for it.
And how do you ensure a safe and supportive environment when you're getting into this work with people?
Well, the first thing is screening, so we have to be careful. There's quite strict screening protocols, and that's to keep people safe and to keep us safe. Um, and then it's building a good relationship, like a rapport. So before I was a therapist, I was a adventure sports guide. I worked for 20 years on rivers and mountains all around the world, including in the Himalayas and Africa and all sorts of places. So I was used to guiding in high intensity environments. And I actually feel there's a lot of crossover with psychedelic facilitation, because really you're managing people's fears and you're building trust, and you're being authentic. If people like, if you're in a mountain and you're scared as a guide, people aren't going to trust you, or you don't know the way. So you have, it's building that human connection, which creates the safety, which creates the container that, the people, and if people, we always say to people, like, if this doesn't feel right for you, don't come with us. Go. It needs to feel intuitively. It needs to feel right, that you feel safe, and that we feel good about it too. So it's a very personal thing. It's a very human thing.
Okay, and how do you handle situations where a participant might have an unexpected or challenging reaction?
Yeah, and we've had a lot of that. We've seen. So we work broadly in the tradition of Stan Groff, the great pioneer of this work, who, by the way, came to Ireland and worked with Dr. Ivor Brown here in Ireland. So there's a great tradition. Ivor Brown, the famous psychiatrist, was doing this work in Ireland back in the 70s and 80s, and an absolute legend he was. So we work in that way, in a group space, in a cathartic space, where people have a space to process sometimes their traumas in a somatic way, in a physical way. Um, and that means anything can come up in the space. So people can feel anger, they can feel fear, they can feel like love and joy and all the bliss as well. But it can be really intense. And usually what we do is create a space where people have the space to process what they need to process. And that works as long as there's safety there, as long as they don't disassociate or it's too much. It can be too much, and then it's not therapeutic. So we've ways of kind of bringing people into that safety, into regulation of their nervous system, where they can stay with whatever they want to experience, process it, and leave it then in the ceremony. Now that does often people need a lot of integration. So if someone has had a really difficult psychedelic experience, the integration is the key. And what we found, if you can help people find meaning in suffering, so you can have the worst experience, but if you can find the meaning of, okay, why did I feel that? Why was I brought there? What did I need to learn? What was I shown? And why was I shown it? That can reframe something from being a terrifying ordeal to, okay, I understand. I needed to see that. I needed to go into that fear. And that reframing can be very helpful from a therapeutic perspective. So it's creating that safety and container, which is can be months long. It's not just coming and taking a few mushrooms. It's a
Hmm.
long term process on both sides, before and after.
Okay, and are you as guides also um partaking of psychedelics?
No, now sometimes I have on many on occasions, and sometimes we do, but more often, or one of it, there'll be a team of four facilitators. Sometimes one may partake, but usually no. Because what I found is, actually, it's not about me or any of the, it's never it's never about us. It's about the people and what they need. So when you're holding space for people, actually it's better to be fully sober, so you can focus fully on what the person needs, um, and be in service for them. It's not, because if you take mushrooms yourself, sometimes it can bring you into your own process and distract you from the other, from what you're there for. So there's different ways of working, in some shamanic traditions, like in Shipibo ayahuasca tradition, for example, the curandero or shaman will take the medicine, but there's just different ways of working. Mhm.
Okay, can you describe the typical structure or flow of one of your guided sessions?
Yeah, so it usually, if it goes in an arc, as you know, um, and So like there's different maps of consciousness, and one that we use sometimes is the hero's journey or heroine's journey, where we prepare people for a descent, and the shamanic or the psychedelic journey can be a death and rebirth experience. So you're preparing people for that descent into the unknown, the unknown of the psyche or the unconscious. Um, Bearing in mind there may be challenge in there, but usually on the hero's journey or heroine's journey, people meet a helper or guide, or spirit guide that helps them, and they come back from that place with a gift, um, to bring back to the known world or their tribe. So it's framing the psychedelic experience in that way that often helps. And then it's a 6 hour process where they sit on a mat and we use music, live music, and uh, recorded music to bring them on a journey. And that journey, yeah, that journey is designed, I suppose, to bring them as deep as possible in themselves. Um,
Yeah.
and we don't control the outcome. That's something that I often say is that, you know, we create the space, create the container, and then we get out of the way and let people, whatever needs to come up, arise from their deep psyche or unconscious to arise.
Yeah. So, if I'm hearing you correctly, you guys are more focusing on the set and setting of the experience, whereas the journey itself is very much in the hands of the participant.
Yes,
Hmm.
but we do have ways of intervening if people need support. There are ways
Okay.
of methods of intervening if someone is really having a difficult time.
And I probably should have asked you this question at the start because I wonder if people, like, I'm sure that people are going to be listening to this who've never heard of Imbas Forasnai before. So I want to ask, like, why did you choose that name? And I'm getting towards how do you incorporate elements of Irish shamanic tradition into this practice?
Yeah. So I would say, yeah, just to separate out like that, that's working in a very therapeutic way, based on the tradition of Stan Groff, who's the pioneer of psychedelic therapy in the world, really, or one of them. My personal interest is around how do we remember or remind ourselves of our ancient Irish connection to these, what I believe to be shamanic, indigenous medicines of Ireland. And yeah, there's research out there showing that there's this term which I'm sure you're familiar with, Imbas Forasnai, and it means visionary inspiration or manifestation that enlightens, and it comes from Cormac's glossary, which is a 10th century Brehon Law glossary of terms. And Imbas Forasnai in that Gaelic book describes what seems to me to be clearly a shamanic ritual. So it's old Irish and the language is kind of difficult, but it's something along the lines of um the person would ingest the filly or the Filidh would ingest the red flesh of a dog, that's the translation, and go into a trance state for up to 3 days and 3 nights. And in that trance state, they would come back with wisdom or knowledge. They would use so a trance state using sensory deprivation, and they will come back with wisdom or knowledge or healing. Now, that to me sounds like it's clearly a form of shamanic ritual. In the definition of Martial Eliade, who wrote the classic book on shamanism, trance states have been used across cultures, um, whether that's the drum, whether that's sensory deprivation, dance, or psychedelic substances. Um, and my thesis, and it's been shared by others, and my belief is that, well, this red flesh of a dog is probably reference to the Amanita muscaria, the red and white mushroom, which when ingested in the right quantities brings you into actually a very dissociative state. So it's a very difficult mushroom to work with. Um, but many traditions, such as the Sami in Finland and the shamanic traditions of Siberia, use the Amanita muscaria. So my question is, have we lost the memory of an indigenous Irish shamanic tradition using the Amanita muscaria and probably psilocybin, Liberty Cap, to get into these altered states. Now, there's no definitive proof in this, but there's tantalizing evidence um, around this. And this is what I've been exploring myself over the past couple of years, this link.
Yeah. Um, so let's explore it a little bit in a little
Yeah.
bit more detail now. Do you think that they are saying that you have to consume the flesh of a dead animal in order to put lay people off? And you said Filidh, which I know is a poet. So do you consider the Filidh to be shamans of old Ireland? Yeah,
Yes, yeah, I do. I do think because shamanism is a really loaded word these days. Like, there's so much that comes with it. And of course, shamanism is not native to Ireland as a word. It comes from Siberia. One of the translations, I think, is the one who sees in the dark. Now, there's a definition of the Filidh by, I think it was Thomas O'Reilly, the scholar, where he described the Filidh, if I can remember correctly. Yeah, he wrote in 1946, Thomas O'Reilly. He states, this is a quote now, the object of the Filidh, or seer, was to commune with the other world in order that he might tap into the divine omniscience for his own ends. So communing with the other world. That's pretty much an exactly what Marcel Eliade said what the shaman was. So the one that walks between the worlds. So my interpretation of this is that um yeah, the Filidh, or some of the Filidh at least, at some stage in our history, were the shamans of Ireland. Now, they maybe use different techniques to get into those altered states. So they definitely use mantra. We know that for sure. They used incantation. They definitely use probably music and the harp and drumming, things like that. The harp was used for sure. The question is whether they use psychedelic or the Amanita muscaria. And I'm saying, well, they grow everywhere. Why wouldn't they have why
yeah.
wouldn't they use them?
And I'm just reaching in the back of my memory here, and you said it was the flesh of a red dog. Is there accounts where it also says the flesh of a deer?
Could be, could be. I'm not
Yeah.
aware of that.
So I think so that comes back to the question I asked a moment ago. It's like, do you think that this flesh of a red dog or flesh of a dead animal, let's just say that, was included in these manuscripts in order to put the lay people off and keep it only for the initiated, which would be the Filly and the Druids and so on and so forth?
Yes. Yeah, because the Cormac's Glossary, remember, it was written by the early Christian monks. And I think in one account it says that St. Patrick tried to ban Imbas Forasnai because Imbas Forasnai is
Yes.
also mentioned in both the mythological cycles, in the Fianna cycle and in the older cycle, the Taun cycle. Both Fionn McCool and um, Cuchulainn
You
are
call
said
it,
to be
yeah.
able to access Imbas Forasnai through other ways. I think one of them is consuming the hazelnut and the nuts of
Yeah.
Sagast, Legas. So there may have been multiple ways to
And
access the altered
I
state.
know that Fionn McCool was able to access knowledge by chewing on his thumb because that's in the story how it goes is that there was a blister on the salmon of knowledge and he popped the blister
Yeah,
and then he put the thumb into his mouth and he all of a sudden he had knowledge. So then throughout his career as a warrior, he was able to do that. He was able to put his thumb into his mouth and have knowledge that wasn't readily available to those that were around him.
that's right. And he could also heal anyone, couldn't he? Didn't he have the
I
gift to heal?
perhaps because there's many legends about Fionn McCool, so even in some legends he turns into a giant miraculously,
Yeah.
and he chases Ben and Donna across the Giant's Causeway. Um, so yeah, it's just interesting to know that these different methods existed to access this higher inspiration.
Yes. And I'm not saying like the mushroom was the only way, for sure it wasn't. There's definitely other ways, but I think it's definitely worth exploring, you know.
Excellent.
And
So, Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like because this is our
Yeah.
own ancestral memory almost, and I feel like we're so colonized in Ireland.
Yeah.
There's so many layers of colonization that this has been stamped out. I feel,
Yeah.
and
I
what we're
mean,
doing, remembering a bit now.
first we were colonized by the church, and then we were colonized by Anglo-Normans, Vikings, I should say, as well, and then Anglo-Normans, and then later the British people.
The Roman
Um,
Church, yeah,
yeah, exactly. But yeah, talking about this and thinking about this, it's like I feel like I'm remembering some distant memory, like a dream, like a dream I think I've had, but I'm not too sure because it's difficult to conjure
yeah.
up the visuals for that.
That's a great way of putting it. Like it's almost like I keep coming back to this stuff. Like probably like yourself, my girlfriend will be laughing at me. Like I'll be spent if I'm left alone and for a few hours, I'll be researching this stuff on the internet. Like
Yeah.
that's what I do in my spare time. Like you know,
Yeah, well, I'm not going to laugh at you because you said at the start that we're probably on the same page with a lot of stuff because that's what I'm doing as well with my time, with my spare time. So you're in good company here. How do you tailor, um, how do you tailor your guidance to the unique emotional needs of the people that you're dealing with in the sessions? And do you include this concept of Irish shamanic tradition? And if so, how do you do that?
yeah. So there's so overall we work in a person-centered way, which means I'm not the expert in you. If you come on one of our retreats, I'm not going to be telling you what you need. We'll listen to you and hear what you need, and it's like a co-creation, yeah. Um, And also because we get people from all around the world, from all cultures, we do work in a way where we don't impose our beliefs on anyone. We don't say come on our retreat and like you have to do it in this you have to believe in the shamanic worldview. We don't say that because people are so many different belief systems these days. But overall we work behind the scenes, I suppose, in a shamanic way. Based on my own training, I trained with Martin Duffy in the Irish Centre for Shamanic Studies in Dundee Park, who was a great man. I don't know if you know him, but he was a great teacher of mine. And he also trained with Stan Groff himself, and he worked with Ivor Brown. So in this country, in Ireland, we had this tradition ourselves of psychedelic therapy that I think in Ireland we're very good at like we're not very good at celebrating our own, We'll look for other experts from, London or America to tell us this is okay. But actually we have this tradition ourselves. And I feel like we're remembering that. And it's not to say that there was a living tradition, but we try and incorporate as much as we can in our ceremonies. Yeah, the spiritual protection of the medicine wheel based on the trainings that I've had. Um, and then bringing in traditional Irish music, chanting, when and where appropriate, and that to me, it feels authentic because it's authentic to me. I'm coming from that place where, yeah, it's just being real and bringing
Mm.
it from that place of realness.
And
But we don't impose anything on anyone. There's no like, this is how it is
yeah,
type thing.
do you have certain rituals that you use to like open the ceremony, close the ceremony, and how do they tie into this Irish tradition? Because it sounds like you are saying that there isn't much structure or form to it. So I'm just curious, how do you open the ceremony and how do you close the ceremony?
Yes. Well, there is a structure. There's a clear structure, and we do open the space in the shamanic tradition that I've been trained in, which is based on the Irish medicine wheel, the Celtic medicine wheel, the four directions, the four elements, and calling in then the spirit guides that protect the space, like calling in spiritual protection for a ceremony, which I feel is really, really, really important. In fact, essential. So there's the North American medicine wheel, which many people may be familiar with, and there's the Celtic medicine wheel, and they're slightly different. There's differences, but there's a lot of similarities too. And the main thing is that you're calling on your guides and allies to protect the space. And that is essential. So we do that before and after every ceremony that we do. And I feel that's an essential part of what we do. I don't really talk too much about that. Actually, we do it usually before the participants arrive, but because it's if some people don't understand, maybe. But yeah, it's really important. Mm.
Okay, thank you. And what role does storytelling or mythology, particularly Irish mythology, play in your facilitation of these sessions?
That's a really good question. Um, and I might tie that more into the men's work because we do psychedelic therapy in Holland and Costa Rica, but we've been running men's retreats in Ireland for about 10 years. And there the mythology seems to be a lot more relevant and alive. And in fact, I'm running a men's retreat soon in Sligo in June on this idea of the Fianna and how the ancestral memory or the mythology of the Fianna can um, be applied today, what we can learn from the Fianna. And because there's a lot there, there's a lot in those stories. So a lot of men's work, for example, that's done is brought in from America and based on the mytho-poetic traditions of Robert Bly, for example, and the Iron John and all that, which is amazing. I've done those, done part of that work, but I feel like we've such a rich vein here of knowledge and wisdom, and it's ours. Like it's in our blood, literally. And what I'm trying to do is, yeah, to bring those stories more into relevance, like as in, for example, I believe there's a crisis of masculinity at the moment, like where, most men are like, what are we doing? Like, and
Yeah,
well, how,
I agree.
what are our positive role models? And well, we can look to the Fianna of what are these stories and what we can learn from them. And like the ancient mythology was not always positive. Let's remember, like there was a lot of conflict and there was
Yeah.
I think to some degree we need to write new stories. But that said, there's a lot of wisdom in the past.
Do you use, like you mentioned, Nifina? Do you also draw on the archetype of Cuchulainn, who, let's face it, he had a dark side to him as well. Like, do you ever bring in that concept of the dark side of the shadow self and so on?
That's a really good question. Yeah, we do work with the shadow a lot. Um, do shadow work. But no, to answer your question there, and this is where I think people need to be a little bit careful with the Irish mythology. I think we need to be very careful what energy we call in and what energy we invoke. You're right in saying so. Cuchulainn may be a good example. Um, if you invoke the gods of war, be prepared for the consequences. So personally,
Yeah.
no, I would never invoke Cuchulainn or certain other deities um, who were associated with war. I think so. I think in this new wave of there's a lot of people holding space these days and opening ceremonies and things. I think people need to be very aware, very discerning what energies you work with, because not all the energies in this land were positive, for sure. There was a lot of darkness there too. So, um, any, yeah, does that answer your question? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you said that there's a crisis of masculinity, and I agree with you that there is a crisis of masculinity. And I wonder if part of that crisis of masculinity is suppressing that rage. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like like Cuchulainn had a such thing as a battle spasm, the
Mm.
Riastra. And I just picture, I haven't been on your retreats, you know what I mean? So I don't know what they're like, and that's why I'm asking you these questions. But I'm just wondering, is there a place in the men's movement today to just scream out with anger and rage and fury in the
Yes.
same way that Cuchulainn did in those stories?
Yes. And yeah, definitely there is a space for that, and we do allow for that rage and anger and physical, like aggression on occasion to come through. I suppose I was associating Cú Chulainn more with the death and like the kind of almost psychopathic element of warriorship,
Yeah,
So that's the thin line.
I know that exactly. Yeah.
Like if you invoke that energy, well, yeah, it's true. I feel it needs a more healthy expression than,
Hmm.
you know,
Okay.
raping and pillaging. Not that too
Yeah,
cool.
okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. So would you describe that as a challenge then that you would face in how you would integrate this
Yes.
kind of raw and like very masculine and rage-filled men, right? Would you describe that as a challenge then that you, it sounds like that's what you mean when you say I have to be careful about what I'm inviting in because you have to be willing to accept the consequences of that.
Yes. So when working with the archetypes, there's always a shadow. So there's definitely a shadow side of the warrior. The warrior is a beautiful archetype. The warrior protects. The warrior stands up for what they believe in. And I think we need to connect into our warrior energy, and for sure. That's why the Fianna energy for me at the moment feels good. The shadow side of the
Yeah.
warrior, what is that?
This is the thing with Finn McCool, like he doesn't seem to have the same dark side as Cuchulainn does. But here's the thing, right? I was at a storyteller last Sunday, just gone out the day after Ishnok, and he made the observation, Sean Cuddy. I've interviewed him on the
Sean, I know
channel a
Sean,
couple of yeah, I've interviewed him on the channel a couple of weeks ago. Um, the thing that people forget about Cuchulainn is that Balor was his great grandfather. So he has Fomorian blood in him. He's also the son of Lu, and Lu is the grandfather of no, sorry, Balor is the grandfather of Lu, which would make Balor Cuchulainn's great grandfather. Excuse me. So that's probably where some of this like raw rage-filled energy actually comes from. But within the Fianna, they were poets first, and they were more, how could you say, they only attacked when either their honor was attacked or the honor of Ireland was attacked, or and they were kind of like this romantic, I would say even samurai like,
yeah,
code of ethics, code of conduct. Um, and I'm trying to remember what the principles of Nafina were now, but they're not in my mind at the moment. And well, I do remember a couple of them. He should take his wife without portion, which means that they should marry a woman who is not necessarily a wealthy woman, that they're not marrying for status. Um, And so, and then Usheen as well, he's the son of Fionn McCool. He was also a very wise poet. He went off to the Tir na Nog, the land of Tir na Nog. He came back. The bridle on his horse snapped. He touched the ground and he aged 300 years in an instant. And that's when he was brought to St. Patrick. And there's this beautiful manuscripts of the dialogue of the two sages. And it's just, he's extolling the virtues of the Nefina. And he's very sad to find that the place where they used to hang out is now desolate and it's a
yeah.
ruin, you know? So that's why I'm just saying that it's probably, I understand why you would choose the Nefina as a positive male role model archetype rather than Cuchulainn, who also has this kind of dark aspect, the Fomorian aspect. So yeah.
Like, let's look at Conor McGregor, as an archetype of a warrior. Like, what an incredible warrior, but wow, what a dark side. There's a darkness there, which we all know about. So that's the struggle for us as men, is who are our role models. And I think, yeah, looking at, I feel like Nafina have that. And like WB Yeats had a really interesting thing actually about, because all of the mainstream chronology says, that Cuchulainn myths are older, and they probably were. But Yeats feels like the Fianna myths are older because they go back to a time when Ireland was a forest and we were a forest people. And he feels like there's an ancestral memory there going back even further, even if, so I like that too. I like this connection with the forest. And they were warriors, they were hardcore, but they also were poets and they were lovers and they were musicians. So for me, that is and protectors. That's a more beautiful archetype at the moment to tap into. Mm.
Yeah, it just reminds me of the book that what's it called? husband, warrior, magician, king. Does that
Yeah.
ring a bell?
Yeah. It's the famous. It's not husband. What's yeah? I always forget the four archetypes that are classically
Yeah.
used in men's work. Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, you could say that Fianna and the Fianna, they embody these archetypes more broadly speaking than
Yes.
say an individual like Cuchulainn would.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you facilitate this connection between ancestral or cultural energies within the framework of what you've described as Imbas Forasnai?
Yeah. So yeah, there's I think the two approaches go well together. The Western psychotherapeutic approach in a group setting and the shamanic approach. I think it's just bringing the two together and trying to bring the best parts of both. And how we work is we try and speak the language of our clients. So it's not about me and what I think, it's really what will resonate with people and how to connect to people and we speak that language then. So if we need to speak like the language of Jungian psychology or internal family systems or transpersonal psychology, we can do that. But sometimes that mytho-poetic language is what people need and it's what they resonate with.
And
So
how do you address skepticism or, accusations of cultural appropriation when
I,
presenting your practice as an Irish shamanic practice?
yeah, so so we don't necessarily present our work as an Irish shamanic practice. We say, look, this is therapeutic use of psilocybin, while it's being informed, I believe, by our own ancestral memory. But to tap into the cultural appropriation thing, I mean, how can we be appropriating our own culture?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a fair point.
You introduced me as Rob Coffey at the start of the call, which is fair enough. That's my name. But I've started using my Gaelic name, which is Ó Cobhthaigh. And only in the past couple of
Yeah.
years, and actually had a lot of resistance to that. Feels a bit weird, felt weird, but I'm owning it a bit more now. But Ó Cobhthaigh was a Brehon name, as was Ó
Right.
Gaelic, Ó
Yeah.
Daly, Ó
Yeah.
Daly, and
Yeah.
they were the names of the Brehons. The Brehons of Uisneach were Ó Cobhthaigh. Like I was told that by the historian of Uisneach there, Justin Moffat. I didn't know that. And and as Irish people, many of us, uh, it's not unique by any means. Like the Gaelic clans were very strong. And looking at our genetics, I started to explore genealogy. Most of us in this land of Ireland come from the Gaelic clans of Ireland.
Yeah. Hmm.
Not just me and you, or pretty much the vast majority of Irish people.
Yeah.
So why is it that we have this? Well, I'll tell you why. It's through colonialism that we have this. We almost colonize ourselves now. I call it self-colonization, where we're like so colonized, we police ourselves, and you're like, who do you think you are? Well, why is it that reconnecting to our own ancestral roots,
Mm.
uh, in other cultures, that's celebrated, but why is it when we connect to our own ancestral Gaelic culture
Yeah.
through the language or whatever way, that there's this such resistance? Like we were an
Yeah.
indigenous people of this land and still are, as far as I'm concerned. And I might come from South Dublin and speak with a South Dublin accent, but that does not take away from my Gaelic heritage.
Exactly. Yeah. Here, here. You just reminded me of something that I heard recently on, I think it was a TikTok video. But
Yeah.
do you know this idea in Ireland, like don't be bold?
Yeah,
Like you've probably heard that from your mother or your grandmother.
yeah.
Well, in Irish, that's Nobby Donna.
Donna, yeah.
And Donna is where we get poem from.
Oh, yeah.
It's like don't be ostentatious, don't be bold, It's like don't draw attention to yourself because if you drew attention to yourself, you probably lost your life. And that's just one example of how we've been anglicized. Um, I say we're perfectly colonized as a
Yeah,
people, and I tell you why I say that. I know that there's people who speak Irish in the west of Ireland. Fair play to them, right? I wish, and I am actually learning Irish
yeah,
at the moment because I feel like something's missing inside of me.
yeah,
But the most of the island is not able to speak fluent Irish. We can't even curse the bastards in our own tongue in our head.
mm,
And that's why I say we're perfectly colonized because I've done a lot of traveling over the last nearly a decade or so. And I've met people who are from other colonized countries, such as India, such as Kenya, and such as Malaysia. But they still have their language.
Mm,
And I see the language as the key to understanding our identity. And it's like encoded with meaning. And as soon as you start to decode that, like Nobby Donna, um, you it's like you're kind of waking up from the Matrix a little bit. It's like you're kind of waking up from the Matrix and you're rediscovering a part of yourself that you thought didn't exist anymore. You thought was dead. And I think that way about the Brehon Law as well, because Brehon Law is so central to the identity of an Irish man that it breaks my heart that they're like, what's Brehon Law? Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? Even I did an interview on Off Grid Ireland there a while ago, and this elderly woman, I guess she was old because she sounded like she was old, but I couldn't see her. And apologies if she's listening now. But she came on and said, I never heard about the Brehon Law before. I said,
yeah,
she goes, I must be stupid. I said, no, you're not stupid. You're colonized. You're a
yeah,
colonized person. And the fact that you don't know what the Brehon Law is just goes to show how much we've been colonized because it's like finding out the next day that we had a hurling, we had a sport and it was called hurling or GAA or Irish dancing or the Irish language. It's that significant to the identity of what is an Irish man, what is a Gaelic person, that if you don't understand that, if for people who don't understand that, it's like not having any of those other things I've just named. It's like not having access to your language. It's not having access. It's like not having access to your culture, your arts, and so on and so forth. So let me ask you this. What role does vulnerability play in the experiences you guide? And how do you create space for men in particular to explore that safely?
yeah. Man, you asked the best questions. And when you were talking there, I like something touched me. I was like, yeah, I feel what you're feeling. I don't know what it is about the Brehon Law.
You're picking up what I'm putting down.
Yeah, on a deep level, on a somatic body level, I'm like, yeah, there's something like the brutality of the 16th and 17th centuries in Ireland. We d- we don't learn that in school. Maybe a fraction in primary school, but it was so bleak. You know, in the 9 Years' War, I'll answer your question in a while, but just to point this out, in the 9 Years' War, when Elizabeth I invaded Ireland, 20% of the Irish died. 20%. 60 years later, or in the when in or 45, 50 years later, when Cromwell came, 40% of the Irish population died. So in a century, you had like 60% population replacement. That was way more than even the famine. The famine, I think, during the famine years, I think 25% of the population died. So I think the famine is so alive in our psyche. We all know about it. It's very, very present, and it should be. But what came before the famine? Those centuries was so oppressive and bleak that I think we've almost blocked it out of our psyche. And
Yeah.
how I came to this was I was in Peru with the Shipibo, and I had a very powerful and very difficult ayahuasca journey, one of the most powerful I've ever had. It was, and it brought me to that place. That I had certain things handed down in my family line, like most Irish people. You know, there was alcoholism and there was different things, and that's how I ended up doing this work. And the message I got during that ceremony was it got traced back to something that happened in my family line in the 16th century. And I was asking what it was, and I wasn't told exactly, but the message I got was great evil was done. Great evil was done. So like we're you know that's why there's so much trauma in Ireland.
Yeah.
We're I feel like we're marinating in trauma and shame. You're right.
I agree.
The
I
power
agree.
to answer.
It's like
Yeah,
it's like as a country we've suffered a great abuse. We've been abused
yeah,
as children.
Yeah.
And now, as a country, we are basically teenagers,
Yeah.
young adults, trying to reconcile that, trying to
Yeah.
make sense of the fact that we've been traumatized throughout our history. And even people don't realize how much of this landscape was covered in forest. You mentioned
Yeah.
it earlier with Fionn McCool. That was a trauma. That was our habitat. That was
Yeah.
where we lived. It wasn't like you had cities. Okay, they came in with the Vikings and so on, but we were basically a forest people, and that's an interesting one because forest, it means outside. It means as it's opposite to civili. So you had the civilian centers, and then you had the forest people, and that's where we get the word foreigner from, right? So, and I just wanted to go back to a point that I was making previously, but I didn't actually get to say it. When I told you I was traveling around the world and meeting people from different colonized countries, the difference between the Irish people and those people is that they have their language, they have
Yeah.
their traditional dress. And I always say to them, how bad do you think it had to get in Ireland where they beat the language out of us and we can't even speak it now in our minds to curse them,
Yeah.
you know? So I think that Ireland was a very successful example of colony. So to come back to the question, right? How does vulnerability play a role in the experiences that you guide, and how do you create space for men to explore it safely?
Huge. And yeah, again, your questions are like really nailing it for me. Yeah, like vulnerability is huge. Well, to separate the men's work for initially, like we don't need psychedelics for the men's work in Ireland. All you need to do is create a container for men to be vulnerable, and it just pours out, and that gets creating the safety. Certain things are needed to create the safety. The stories need to be told, the Brené Brown thing of shame dies when stories get told in safe spaces. Um, my experience with shame, um, my first experience with really dealing with shame, I'll never forget it. Where I told a story that I'd never told anyone. And I'll never forget. It's something that had been locked inside of me, and I spoke it. Like I gave it voice. And that in itself has tremendous power. When you speak the unspoken, and you're right about the language, but like speaking the unspoken takes away the power of shame. Shame is that was just hidden, hidden. It's the most secretive. It's the the thing you never tell anyone, and it's kept there, like the neglected kid in the attic type thing as a metaphor. But when you speak it and share it and be vulnerable enough to share it, um, something happens. It's like an alchemy or magic where the light gets shone on it and it actually disempowers the shame. So I feel like we need to be vulnerable and we need to have these conversations. And I love what you're doing with the Brehon Academy. And just the more of us, the more and more people in Ireland having these conversations.
Mm.
And that's so necessary because we're dealing with centuries. And we've had some clients in our retreat come from one client recently, a Mayo man, an elderly man. And, if you think trauma is something far in the past, I mean, the levels of neglect, and even in my own case, my father's family, in the 50s in Ireland, even then it was a brutal place. And that was only like, think about it, 100 years after the famine. Those people are alive 2 generations.
Yeah,
So we're
wow.
not
I
that far
never,
removed.
yeah,
We're not that far removed. Each generation it gets a bit easier, I feel.
yeah.
But there's so much work to do in this country. There's so much work needed around the
So
trauma, shame.
what I do, well, what I did before I had the surgery was I was working with students basically
Yeah.
and international students. And what I started to do was I started to deliver public speaking classes to people.
Mm,
And I evolved because I've been speaking at different festivals and stuff for years and years, and I picked up like different tips and so on along the way. And I've evolved these different concepts. And one of the concepts I divulged to my audience was vulnerability. is not something to be ashamed of. Vulnerability is a strength, but only when you name it and claim it.
Mm,
It's only a strength when you name it and claim it and you say, you know, you stand up in front of your audience and you say, I am vulnerable because of this reason. There's no shame in that, okay? It might feel that you're carrying shame, but it's only when you bring it out into the open that you
yeah,
can exercise that shame. You can say, yes, this is something that happened to me in the past, but that's not me. That's not who
yeah,
I am, right? Um, so how do you incorporate the concept of seership or visionary insight, which is often associated with Imbas Forasnai, into your sessions?
yeah. Well, the Imbas Forasnai comes naturally, I think, when you work with psychedelics or psilocybin or ayahuasca or iboga, the insights come. And it's the path of direct revelation, and but then the hard work is listening to that inspiration. So this is important too, not to chase the highs of ceremony, but to embody and integrate the visions. And I think that's really where we're at in Ireland at the moment. There's so much vision, it feels like. There's so many visionary people and there's vision, but yet the structures of society are still quite, I would say, almost oppressive. It's hard to change things. Like, for example, like, say, just living in community or growing f food. There's people doing it or trying to do it, but there's resistance, yeah. So I think the vision, re-inspiration needs to be combined with activism and action to create change. And I feel like that's what's happening or will be happening, it continue to happen over the next few decades. It's a really exciting time in Ireland. There's so much going on. It feels really incredible, like the upwelling of remembrance. That it's almost like the collective is remembering, and that is really exciting, you know? Yeah,
Yes, it is. And I just want to say this as well that it's I've been doing this since 2013, like the Brehon Academy officially. But I've been into it for many years before that, before I started like making content and so on. And what I've noticed recently is that there's so many of us now out there putting out videos, writing articles. I mean, I'm just after meeting people at Ishnok who are doing great things as well. I'm just after interviewing Philip O'Heda, Nathan Featherstone, Bertie Brosnan. Do you know, like these are all
yeah,
researching their own thing, right? They're all following their passion, putting out the content, and it's just really amazing to it feels like, and I'm not going to jump the gun on this, but it feels like we're at the beginning of a cultural revival. And
yes,
if we are, I'm so happy that this is finally happening.
yes. And I think you're right. I think the Brehon Law is an essential part of this because as we move away from the individual capitalist structures, we're going to need models of collective law and collective natural law. And I think Brehon Law is there, as a template, as a guide to help us in that journey.
I agree. So this is my last question, and maybe we can continue to have a conversation after it. But what long-term impacts have you observed in men in particular, but also in your practice, who have participated in multiple sessions or single sessions, particularly in relation to their sense of purpose or connection to Irish spiritual heritage?
Yeah, really good question. Well, I'm going to speak about my own experience there. I feel on my lived experience that ayahuasca, psilocybin, mushrooms, iboga have really helped me to reconnect to my own ancestral memory, to decondition those layers of conditioning, which I had. I grew up in South Dublin, the whole thing. I didn't like it, but that's the conditioning that I had. And there was a lot of on deconditioning that needed to occur. And I feel like the plant medicines helped me with that deeply. And then, yeah, just connecting to the land. Through that, I started connecting to the land, going to the sacred sites, and then just remembering, it's almost like, oh, it's like like you said, it's not like a logical thing. It's an intuitive feeling of like, you just start remembering or. And what I see, like you say, I've been doing this for quite a while now, I suppose, and it seems to be spreading, doesn't it? It seems like
Yes.
a real effect. And like in terms of the men's work, myself and Dara have been running men's retreats about 10 years now, more or less. Loads of the guys who came on our men's retreats are now running their own men's retreats and stuff like that. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
That exciting. It's like the mycelium network starts to grow.
Yes.
Mycelium network will do its thing, right? The mycelium spreads out and it doesn't like hierarchies and it just pops up wherever. And I love that.
Yeah.
So I think the mycelium is quite Brehon in its own way, the mushroom. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like
you
an
could say
organic.
that. Yeah. Oh, so I actually have another question for you. You've heard of Lord of the Rings, right? I assume you've heard of Lord of the Rings, and you know about the lembas bread that's
Yeah.
in this. Now, according to my research, that lembas bread is supposed to be based on the Eucharist, right? Because
Right.
it's like wafer, it's bread, and it gives you sustenance. But do you think that, and I know that J.R. Tolkien was very aware of Irish mythology, so I'm guessing he must have come across the word Imbas Forasnai or Forasnai in his research. And I'm just wondering, do you think there's any connection between lembas bread and Imbas Forasnai? The reason I'm
That's
asking you that is that both of these breads, these substances, they elevate the individual beyond ordinary states. So with the lembas bread, when you eat it, it gives you strength to continue on your journey, and apparently it's more potent when there's less food around. Um, and the Imbas Forosnai, which is kind of like would it be fair to say it's kind of like a fairy bread in Irish tales? It's explicitly Irish. It's tied to the same Celtic spiritual milieu. Some would argue that both represent a shared archetype of sacred nourishment or preparation for divine encounters, preparation for an important journey that you're going on. So I'm wondering if this like too much of a stretch to make that conclusion, and yeah, just what's your general thoughts on that?
Well, not at all. Yeah, it's an amazing association that you've linked. And why not? Because, of course, Tolkien was very familiar with Welsh and Irish mythology. And there is this link but going back even to pre-Christian times, like with Soma in Indo-European cults, like mushroom cults that stretched across all of Asia, Indo, and Europe. There, who knows? There could be a much deeper link there. Um, I'm not directly answering your question, but there's a book by a guy called John Allegro, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, which he kind of came up with
Yes.
the idea that the Amanita was um yeah, Jesus was like the Amanita was an essential part of the early Christian church. So I don't know. Yeah, you could be onto something there. You could be onto something there. Hmm.
So maybe we save that conversation for another day if you're willing to come back and talk to me about these topics like Jesus and the mushroom. So
And we'll have to talk about the links between ancient Ireland and ancient Egypt, which I think we both share a deep fascination with.
that's a good point actually as well. So Rob O'Coffey, um, thanks for your time. Let's just share your links now. So if people want to find you, people are interested in working with you, where's the best place that they can find you? And I know you're also on Instagram and TikTok and so on and so forth. So let's start with the Inward Bound, and we can
Yeah.
move to the other channels in a moment.
Sure. So Inward Bound is www.inwardbound.nl or .ie. Inward Bound, the opposite of Outward Bound. And I have a website or robocofig.com where you can get me on Instagram, robocofig. And that's where, yeah, I promote some of the men's work, which occurs in Ireland, and also the therapeutic work that I do. So
Excellent. Thank you. And where can I find you on Instagram and TikTok and so on and so forth?
yeah, Instagram and TikTok are both my names, Rob Ó Cobhthaigh. You can see it down there in the left corner. Um, yeah, and I keep coming back to my core essence, which is yeah, remembering these the Gaelic myths and stories and history. Mm.
Okay.
And I encourage everyone else to do it as well. You know, there's loads of us doing it. It's exciting. And thank you for all the work that you've been doing, Kevin. And thank you for interviewing me today.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
you're very welcome, Rob.
It's
And this
great.
has been an absolute pleasure. Um, because I didn't really know what we would talk about or how it would go. When I seen your suggestion, I was like quite surprised by that. So, but it's been a real pleasure. It's been real enjoyable talking to you, learning about how you're using psychedelics to do therapeutic work and how you're incorporating some of the Irish mythology and Irish shamanism, dare I say it, into what you're doing as well. So thank you very much for your time and all of your generous sharing of your wisdom.
Thank you as well. Amazing questions. And let keep doing what you're doing. And hope to see you again soon.
There you have it, folks. What did I tell you? Told you it was going to be an interesting journey. And for me, I really enjoyed having this conversation with Rob. Um, Not least of all because I could relate to a lot of what he was saying without going into too much details now. I am quite familiar with the psychedelic experience and various substances, let's just say that. And it's great to see people like Rob and the other people that I've recently been in contact with who are really doing this because they have a deep passion for it, like myself. And I'm looking forward to working with Rob again in the future and maybe meeting him in person. We actually did meet on the Hill of Ishnok there on Saturday, so I'm looking forward to more meetings like that. Before we go, just remember to check out the brehonacademy.org. Please visit the courses tab where you can get access to all of my courses. And if you buy all three of them together, you get three for the price of two. Also, please check out the merchandise store. Over there, you can get t-shirts, mugs, and posters. Follow us on social medias, and please consider becoming a member for as little as $1.99 per month if you want to get access to exclusives and goodies and opportunities that the regular viewers don't actually get access to. Now, thank you for being on this journey with me, and until next time, a Slán go fóill.